Karoline Leavitt wasn't always the bold, unapologetic journalist who would one day shake up live television. She started her career like many others, quietly, cautiously, and eager to prove herself in a world that didn't always welcome newcomers with open arms. Growing up in a small town, Karoline had always been curious about people and their stories. Her parents often joked that she was born asking questions. Whether it was figuring out why her neighbor's garden looked so much greener, or understanding how the local bakery managed to sell out every morning, she wanted answers. That curiosity stuck with her as she grew older, eventually leading her to pursue journalism. Her first job at a tiny news station in a city no one had ever heard of taught her more than just how to write a compelling headline. It showed her the importance of listening, not just hearing what someone said, but truly understanding their perspective. At that little station, she covered everything from school fundraisers to minor political scandals. Each story gave her a chance to connect with real people, hear their voices, and share their struggles. But it wasn't long before Karoline realized that while these stories mattered deeply, they weren't reaching enough people. If she wanted to make a bigger impact, she needed to aim higher. So she packed her bags and moved to a larger city, determined to climb the ranks of broadcast journalism. Those early days were tough. She worked long hours for little pay, often staying late in the office to edit footage or chase leads that sometimes led nowhere. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she wasn't cut out for this line of work. But then something inside her would push back, a quiet voice reminding her why she started in the first place. Journalism wasn't just a job for Karoline, it was a calling. She believed in holding powerful people accountable and giving a voice to those who felt powerless. It took years of hard work, persistence, and countless rejections before Karoline finally landed a role at a national network. By then, she had earned a reputation as someone who didn't shy away from difficult topics. She wasn't afraid to ask the tough questions, even if it made others uncomfortable. This fearless approach caught the attention of viewers and colleagues alike. People began to notice her name attached to groundbreaking investigations, stories that exposed corruption, shed light on overlooked communities, and sparked important conversations across the country. But despite her growing success, Karoline never lost sight of her roots. She still remembered what it felt like to sit across from someone sharing their most personal struggles, trusting her to tell their story fairly. And she carried that sense of responsibility with her, no matter how big the platform became. Her colleagues often described her as relentless yet compassionate, a rare combination in the competitive world of media. They admired her dedication, though some admitted privately that they wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of one of her interrogations. Little did anyone know, however, that Karoline was about to step into the biggest challenge of her career. It all began innocently enough, with a tip-off from an anonymous source. The message was vague at first, hinting at troubling behavior behind the scenes of a popular daytime talk show. At first glance, it seemed like just another rumor floating around Hollywood circles. These kinds of whispers weren't uncommon in the entertainment industry, where egos clashed and secrets festered beneath glamorous facades. But there was something about this particular tip that nagged at Karoline. Maybe it was the way the source phrased certain details, or perhaps it was the urgency in their tone. Whatever it was, it planted a seed of suspicion in her mind. Curiosity got the better of her, and Karoline decided to dig deeper. What started as casual research quickly turned into a full-blown investigation. She spent weeks combing through public records, connecting with former employees, and piecing together fragments of information that painted a disturbing picture. Slowly but surely, she uncovered patterns of behavior that suggested the problems went far beyond petty workplace drama. This wasn't just about disagreements among coworkers. It was systemic, deliberate, and hidden in plain sight. As the pieces fell into place, Karoline knew she couldn't ignore what she was finding. The weight of the evidence pressed down on her shoulders, demanding action. Yet she also understood the risks involved. Taking on such a high-profile target meant putting herself in the crosshairs of powerful individuals who wouldn't hesitate to fight back. Still, the thought of staying silent weighed even heavier. For Karoline, journalism wasn't just about reporting facts, it was about standing up for truth, even when it was inconvenient or dangerous. And so, with resolve burning brightly within her, she prepared to take the next step, bringing everything she'd uncovered to the world. What happened next would change not only her life but also the lives of millions watching at home, and nothing would ever be the same again. Karoline knew she was stepping into uncharted territory. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the picture became. At first, the information trickled in slowly, bits and pieces that seemed harmless on their own, but added up to something far more sinister when put together. An offhand comment here, a cryptic email there, and soon Karoline found herself staring at a pattern she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just one person or one isolated incident. It was a web of behavior that stretched across the entire production team of the popular talk show. One of the first breakthroughs came from an unexpected source, a former employee who reached out after hearing whispers about Karoline's investigation. This person didn't want to be named, fearing retaliation, but they were willing to share what they'd seen during their time working behind the scenes. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, they described a workplace culture that sounded less like a professional environment and more like a pressure cooker ready to explode. They talked about how certain individuals were treated as untouchable, while others were dismissed or pushed aside without explanation. Favoritism ran rampant, they said, with opportunities handed out based not on talent or hard work, but on loyalty to specific hosts or producers. As Karoline listened, her stomach churned. She'd heard stories like this before, but never involving such a high-profile program. The talk show had been a staple of daytime television for decades, beloved by millions of viewers who tuned in daily for its mix of lively debates, celebrity interviews, and lighthearted banter. To think that beneath all the laughter and camaraderie lay a foundation of toxicity felt almost surreal. But the former employee wasn't done yet. They pulled out their phone and showed Karoline screenshots of text messages exchanged among staff members. Some of the conversations were shocking. Not outright illegal, perhaps, but certainly unethical. There were jokes made at the expense of marginalized groups, discussions about manipulating guest appearances to boost ratings, and even veiled threats aimed at anyone who dared question authority. The more Karoline learned, the angrier she became. Not just for herself, but for everyone affected by this hidden reality. These weren't faceless names in a scandal. These were real people whose lives had been impacted. Some had left the show broken, their confidence shattered by months or even years of mistreatment. Others stayed silent, too afraid of losing their jobs or being blacklisted in the industry to speak up. And then there were the fans, the loyal audience who watched every episode, unaware of the turmoil happening behind the curtain. They trusted the host to represent them, to champion fairness and inclusivity, only to find out, if they ever did, that the truth was far different. But gathering evidence wasn't easy. Many people Karoline approached hesitated to talk, worried about what might happen if they spoke out. One producer admitted privately that they'd witnessed questionable behavior, but refused to go on record, citing fears of ruining their career. Another source agreed to meet but canceled last minute, claiming they'd been warned not to cooperate. Each setback tested Karoline's resolve, but she refused to give up. If anything, it fueled her determination to uncover the full story, not just for justice but for accountability. Someone needed to shine a light on what was really going on, and she believed it was her responsibility to do so. Her investigation took her down paths she hadn't anticipated. Late-night calls led to secret meetings in dimly lit parking lots. Emails poured in from anonymous accounts, each containing new details that corroborated what she already suspected. Karoline spent hours cross-referencing facts, verifying sources, and ensuring every piece of information was accurate. She knew that if she got even one detail wrong, critics would pounce, using it as an excuse to dismiss everything else. Accuracy mattered more than ever, especially when dealing with such sensitive material. And then came the moment that changed everything. A current employee, someone still working on the show, reached out to Karoline through a secure messaging app. They claimed to have audio recordings of private conversations between the hosts and senior producers. At first, Karoline was skeptical, Could this be a setup? Was someone trying to mislead her? But as she listened to the clips, her skepticism melted away. The voices were unmistakable and the content was damning. In one recording, a heated argument revealed deep-seated resentment among the hosts, exposing cracks in the carefully curated image of friendship and unity. In another, a producer openly discussed strategies to silence dissenting opinions within the team, suggesting tactics that bordered on harassment. Hearing those recordings hit Karoline like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the tone, the casualness with which they were spoken, as though everyone involved had grown numb to the harm they were causing. Here was proof, undeniable and raw, of a problem that had festered for years. Now the question was, what should she do with it? She wrestled with the decision for days. On one hand, airing the recordings could expose the truth and force meaningful change. On the other hand, it might destroy careers and relationships, not to mention invite backlash against her own reputation. Journalists often walked a fine line between reporting the news and causing unnecessary harm, and Karoline knew she had to tread carefully. Yet deep down, she also knew that staying silent wasn't an option. Too many people had suffered in silence for too long. Someone had to take a stand. Finally, after countless sleepless nights and endless cups of coffee, Karoline made her choice. She would present her findings publicly, but not recklessly. Every claim would be backed by solid evidence, every accusation thoroughly vetted. She wanted to ensure that when the world finally saw what she'd uncovered, there would be no room for doubt. This wasn't about tearing anyone down. It was about holding them accountable and giving a voice to those who had none. With her plan in place, Karoline began preparing for the biggest moment of her career. She rehearsed her delivery, double-checked her notes, and mentally braced herself for the storm that was sure to follow. Whatever happened next, she told herself, she was ready. The truth was worth fighting for, even if it meant standing alone. The morning of the big reveal arrived, and Karoline woke up with a mix of nerves and determination. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, rehearsing her delivery, and mentally steeling herself for the backlash that was sure to follow. But now, as she sat in the makeup chair at the studio where she would break the story live on national television, reality hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just another segment or investigative piece. It was a bombshell that could shake an entire industry to its core, and she was the one holding the detonator. As the hairstylist brushed her hair into place, Karoline's mind raced through all the possibilities. What if people didn't believe her? What if they accused her of exaggerating or fabricating the whole thing? Worse yet, what if powerful figures retaliated against her career? Or worse, tried to discredit her entirely? These thoughts swirled around her head, but she pushed them aside. Doubt wouldn't help her now. All she could do was focus on the facts, stick to the truth, and let the chips fall where they may. When the countdown began in the control room, 5 minutes till air, Karoline took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was doing this. It wasn't about fame or glory. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about giving a voice to those who had been silenced, exposing wrongdoing so that something could finally be done about it. That thought alone steadied her hands and calmed her racing heart. She walked onto the set, adjusted her blazer, and sat down in the guest chair across from the host. Cameras rolled, lights blazed, and within seconds, millions of viewers tuned in to watch what would become one of the most unforgettable moments in daytime TV history. The host greeted her warmly, unaware of the storm brewing beneath Karoline's calm exterior. They exchanged pleasantries before diving into lighter topics, a recent award she'd won, her journey in journalism, and how she managed to stay grounded despite the pressures of the job. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. But then, the conversation shifted. The host leaned forward slightly, their tone serious. "So, Karoline," they said, "we've heard rumors that you've uncovered something pretty explosive recently. Care to tell us more?" Karoline smiled faintly, her expression unreadable. "Well," she began, her voice steady and measured, "I think it's safe to say that what I'm about to share will leave a mark. not just on the entertainment world, but on how we view accountability in the workplace. With that, she launched into her findings, laying out each detail with precision and care. She started with the basics, the anonymous tips, the patterns of behavior reported by former employees, and the growing mountain of evidence pointing to systemic issues behind the scenes of the popular talk show. As she spoke, the atmosphere in the studio changed. The audience, initially cheerful and chatty, grew eerily quiet. Even the hosts seemed taken aback, their usual charm replaced by stunned silence. Karoline pulled no punches, presenting screenshots of incriminating messages, audio clips of private conversations, and first-hand testimonies from people who had experienced the toxic environment firsthand. She explained how producers manipulated appearances to favor certain guests over others, creating a false narrative of diversity while ignoring marginalized voices backstage. She revealed instances of discrimination, bullying, and outright intimidation tactics used to maintain control over the staff. One clip in particular sent shockwaves through the audience. It featured two senior producers discussing ways to sideline a colleague who had dared to question the fairness of a decision made during a meeting. Their tone was dismissive, almost cruel, as they plotted how to make the person's life miserable until they either quit or fell in line. When Karoline played the recording, the room went completely still. You could hear a pin drop. Viewers at home later described feeling physically sick as they listened to the cold calculation in the voices, realizing that this wasn't just office politics, it was abuse of power. But Karoline didn't stop there. She also shared personal stories from former employees, painting a vivid picture of what it was like to work under such conditions. One woman recounted how she was repeatedly passed over for promotions despite being qualified, simply because she hadn't aligned herself with the right host. Another man described how he was mocked for his accent during private meetings, making him dread coming to work every day. Each story added weight to Karoline's argument, showing that this wasn't just a case of bad management. It was a pervasive culture of exclusion and fear. By the time she finished speaking, the energy in the studio was electric. The host, visibly shaken, thanked her for sharing such important information and promised to address the topic further in future episodes. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Within minutes, hashtags related to the scandal began trending worldwide. People expressed anger, disbelief, and sadness, flooding platforms with comments about how betrayed they felt by the show they had trusted for years. Fans debated whether they should continue watching, while critics called for immediate action to hold those responsible accountable. For Karoline, the reaction was overwhelming but not entirely unexpected. As she left the studio, reporters swarmed her, firing questions about her investigation and asking for clarification on specific points. She answered calmly, reiterating that her goal was transparency, not destruction. "This isn't about tearing anyone down," she told them firmly. "It's about shining a light on the truth so that meaningful change can happen." Back at home later that evening, Karoline allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, messages of support pouring in from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. Some praised her courage, calling her a hero for taking a stand. Others criticized her methods, accusing her of sensationalism or seeking attention. But amidst the noise, one message stood out. A text from a former employee of the talk show, thanking her for giving them hope that things might finally improve. Reading those words brought tears to Karoline's eyes. In that moment, she knew it had all been worth it. Still, she understood that this was only the beginning. The real test lay ahead. How would the network respond? Would they take responsibility, or would they try to sweep everything under the rug? And perhaps most importantly, would this spark broader conversations about workplace ethics in other industries? Only time would tell. But for now, Karoline allowed herself a small smile. She had done what she set out to do, and the world was listening. The morning after Karoline's explosive revelation, the world felt different. Social media timelines were flooded with reactions, some outraged, others heartbroken, and a few dismissing the claims as overblown drama. But no matter where you looked, one thing was clear. People were talking. The talk show at the center of the storm had been a staple in living rooms for decades, a program that many viewers trusted to reflect their values and champion fairness. To see it exposed as something so far removed from its polished image left millions grappling with feelings of betrayal. For the hosts and producers directly implicated, the fallout came fast and hard. Within hours of the broadcast, sponsors began pulling their ads, citing concerns about associating with a brand now linked to controversy. Companies that had once proudly aligned themselves with the show suddenly issued statements distancing themselves, some even apologizing for not seeing the red flags sooner. It wasn't just about money. It was about reputation. No business wanted to be tied to allegations of toxicity or discrimination, especially when public opinion could turn on them in an instant. Meanwhile, fans of the show were divided. Some loyal viewers refused to believe the accusations, insisting they were exaggerated or taken out of context. They argued that every workplace has its issues and accused Karoline of blowing things out of proportion for attention. Others, however, found it impossible to ignore the evidence she presented. Audio clips, screenshots, and personal testimonies painted a picture too vivid to dismiss. These viewers expressed anger, not just at the alleged behavior, but at the idea that they had unknowingly supported a system built on inequality and fear. As the day wore on, the hosts of the talk show appeared live on air, visibly shaken. For years, they had cultivated an image of warmth, humor, and camaraderie, presenting themselves as relatable figures who understood the struggles of everyday life. Now, that carefully constructed facade crumbled before the eyes of millions. One host broke down in tears during the opening segment, apologizing for any pain caused by actions within the production team. Another attempted to defend the show, arguing that while mistakes may have been made, they weren't representative of the overall culture. A third remained eerily silent throughout the broadcast, avoiding eye contact with both the audience and her co-hosts. Despite their efforts to control the narrative, nothing seemed to quell the growing outrage. Protesters gathered outside the network's headquarters, holding signs that read "Accountability Matters" and "Stop Protecting Toxic Systems." Journalists camped out near the building, eager to catch interviews with anyone willing to comment on the scandal. Late-night comedians seized the opportunity to roast the situation, turning the controversy into fodder for jokes that stung more than usual because of their truth. Even politicians weighed in, calling for investigations into workplace practices across the entertainment industry. What started as a single exposé had snowballed into a national conversation about power, privilege, and accountability. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Senior executives scrambled to contain the damage, holding emergency meetings late into the night. Rumors swirled about potential firings, restructurings, and even the possibility of canceling the show altogether. Staff members braced themselves for what might come next, unsure whether they would lose their jobs or face retaliation for speaking out. Those who had stayed silent until now wondered if it was too late to share their own experiences, or if doing so would only make matters worse. Amidst all this turmoil, Karoline remained a central figure. Requests for interviews poured in from networks around the globe, each wanting to hear more about how she uncovered the story and what she hoped to achieve. She handled the attention with grace, using every platform to reinforce her message. This wasn't about tearing down individuals. It was about exposing systemic flaws so they could be fixed. In one particularly poignant interview, she addressed critics who accused her of ruining careers. "If someone's career is built on mistreating others," she said firmly, "then maybe it deserves to end." Her words resonated deeply with many, but not everyone agreed. Some accused her of grandstanding, claiming she cared more about headlines than helping people. Others pointed fingers at her methods, questioning whether airing private conversations was ethical regardless of the circumstances. Yet despite the backlash, support for Karoline continued to grow. Former employees reached out to thank her for giving them a voice, sharing stories of their own struggles and expressing hope that her work might lead to lasting change. Even strangers sent messages of encouragement, praising her bravery and vowing to stand by her side. As days turned into weeks, the impact of Karoline's investigation became undeniable. Other networks launched internal reviews of their own programs, fearing similar skeletons might lurk in their closets. Employees across industries found courage to speak up about mistreatment they'd endured silently for years. Lawmakers proposed hearings to examine workplace ethics in high-profile sectors like entertainment, promising to hold companies accountable for fostering safe environments. For better or worse, Karoline had ignited a firestorm that refused to die down. Through it all, she stayed grounded, focusing on the bigger picture rather than the noise surrounding her. Friends warned her to prepare for long-term consequences, potential lawsuits, smear campaigns, or attempts to discredit her work. But Karoline didn't flinch. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. Too much was at stake. This wasn't just about one show or one group of people. It was about setting a precedent for transparency and fairness in places where power often went unchecked. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment reflecting on everything that had happened, Karoline allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She scrolled through social media, reading comments from people whose lives had been touched by her report. Some thanked her for validating their pain. Others shared stories of abuse they had faced in their own workplaces, inspired by her example to finally speak out. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what she had done, not just exposing wrongdoing but empowering others to demand better. Still, she knew the fight was far from over. While the initial shock of her expose had sparked widespread outrage, sustaining momentum would require vigilance. Change didn't happen overnight, and powerful systems rarely gave up without a fight. As she closed her laptop and turned off the lights, Karoline reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place: to tell the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, and to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on. Weeks turned into months, and the initial frenzy surrounding Karoline's expose began to settle, but the ripple effects continued to spread far beyond what anyone could have predicted. The talk show at the center of the storm underwent dramatic changes, some visible, others hidden beneath layers of corporate maneuvering. Viewers tuning in noticed a shift almost immediately. Familiar faces disappeared from the screen, replaced by new hosts who brought fresh energy but lacked the same household recognition. Behind the scenes, producers were either fired or reassigned, and strict policies were implemented to address workplace behavior. Yet despite these efforts, the damage had already been done. Ratings plummeted as loyal fans abandoned the show, unsure if they could trust it anymore. The network executives responsible for overseeing the program faced mounting pressure. Shareholders demanded answers, questioning why such issues had been allowed to fester unchecked for so long. Board meetings became tense battlegrounds, with fingers pointed in every direction. Some argued that the problems stemmed from poor leadership, while others blamed systemic failures within the industry itself. Regardless of the cause, one thing was clear: the old way of doing things was no longer acceptable. Sweeping reforms were introduced, not just for this particular show, but across all programs under the network's umbrella. Sensitivity training sessions became mandatory, whistleblower protections were strengthened, and anonymous feedback channels were established to give employees a safe space to voice concerns. But change didn't come easily or cheaply. Legal battles loomed on the horizon as former staff members filed lawsuits alleging harassment, discrimination, and wrongful termination. These cases dragged on for months, further tarnishing the network's reputation and costing millions in settlements. Meanwhile, advertisers remained hesitant to return, wary of associating their brands with a company still mired in controversy. For a business built on charisma and connection, the loss of public trust proved devastating. And yet amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. Employees who had once felt powerless now spoke openly about their experiences, grateful for the opportunity to be heard. Slowly but surely, small victories began to pile up, signaling a potential turning point. Karoline watched it all unfold from a distance, careful not to insert herself too deeply into the aftermath. Her role, she believed, was to shine a light, not to dictate how people responded to what they saw. Still, she couldn't ignore the impact her work had made. Other networks took notice, launching internal investigations into their own programs. News outlets reported similar allegations surfacing in late-night shows, reality TV sets, and even morning news broadcasts. It seemed that once the door was opened, countless stories poured out, each one adding fuel to the growing movement for accountability and entertainment. Lawmakers, too, joined the conversation. Congressional hearings were held to examine workplace ethics in high-profile industries, with experts testifying about the unique challenges faced by those working behind the scenes. Legislators proposed bills aimed at protecting workers from retaliation and ensuring transparency in hiring and promotion processes. While some dismissed these efforts as political posturing, others saw them as a step toward meaningful reform. Karoline attended several of these hearings, offering testimony based on her findings and advocating for systemic change. Her presence lent credibility to the discussions, reminding everyone involved that this wasn't just theoretical. It was real, and it affected real people. Yet, not everyone viewed her as a hero. Critics continued to attack her motives, accusing her of sensationalism and self-promotion. Some suggested she had exaggerated certain details to boost ratings or advance her career. Others claimed she had gone too far, ruining lives without considering the broader consequences. Karoline braced herself for these accusations, knowing they came with the territory. But what surprised her most was the support she received from unexpected corners. Former colleagues reached out to commend her courage, sharing their own frustrations with toxic environments they'd encountered throughout their careers. Strangers sent heartfelt letters thanking her for inspiring them to speak up about injustices they'd endured silently for years. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a young production assistant who described how watching Karoline's investigation gave her the strength to confront a bullying supervisor. "I never thought anyone would listen," the writer confessed, "but seeing you stand up for what's right made me realize I deserved better." Reading those words brought tears to Karoline's eyes. She hadn't set out to be a role model, but somehow she had become one, and that realization weighed heavily on her shoulders. With admiration came responsibility, and she vowed to use her platform wisely moving forward. As time passed, Karoline found herself reflecting more deeply on the cost of truth-telling. The months since the expose had been grueling, filled with sleepless nights, heated debates, and moments of doubt. There were days when she questioned whether it had all been worth it, especially when critics sharpened their knives or when friends warned her about lingering risks. But then she'd think back to the messages of gratitude, the quiet nods of acknowledgement from strangers, and the knowledge that she had sparked a conversation that might lead to lasting change. Those reminders kept her going, even when the road felt impossibly steep. Her journey also forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. She realized how much easier it was to focus on exposing wrongdoing than to sit with the emotional toll it took on her. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she sometimes replayed moments from the investigation, the anxious phone calls, the whispered confessions, the weight of knowing she held someone else's life in her hands. It wasn't glamorous or heroic. It was messy, exhausting, and often lonely. But through it all, she clung to the belief that speaking the truth mattered, even if it hurt, even if it scared her. By the end of the year, the landscape of daytime television looked markedly different. Shows that had once thrived on manufactured drama struggled to adapt to a world demanding authenticity and accountability. Audiences grew savvier, less willing to accept polished facades without questioning what lay beneath. Networks scrambled to rebuild trust, investing in diverse voices and transparent practices. It was slow progress, marred by setbacks and missteps, but it was progress nonetheless. And though the scars of the scandal would take years to heal fully, the seeds of transformation had been planted. For Karoline, the experience changed her in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to use her voice for good. Yet she also carried a newfound humility, aware of both the power and limitations of journalism. She knew that while she could expose problems, solving them required collective effort, a lesson she hoped others would embrace as well. As she prepared for her next project, whatever it might be, she reminded herself of the simple truth that had guided her all along. The best stories are the ones that remind us of our shared humanity. And in telling those stories, we have the chance to make the world just a little bit better. Months after the dust began to settle, Karoline found herself sitting in a quiet cafe on a crisp autumn morning. The world had moved on. New scandals made headlines. Fresh controversies dominated social media feeds. But the impact of her investigation lingered like an echo that refused to fade. As she sipped her coffee and watched leaves drift lazily to the ground outside, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. What had started as a quest for truth had become something far greater, a catalyst for change, a mirror held up to society, and a reminder of the power and cost of standing up for what's right. The talk show at the center of the storm was still limping along, trying desperately to rebuild its image. New faces filled the screen, each smiling brightly and promising viewers a fresh start. But it wasn't just about replacing people, it was about shifting culture. Behind the scenes, anonymous surveys were distributed, town hall meetings were held, and diversity consultants were brought in to guide discussions about inclusivity and respect. Progress was slow, uneven, and often frustrating, but there were signs of hope. Employees who had once feared speaking up now felt empowered to share their thoughts, knowing they wouldn't face retaliation. Small victories, yes, but victories nonetheless. For Karoline, life had shifted too. Her bold move had earned her both accolades and enemies. Awards ceremonies celebrated her bravery, calling her a trailblazer for investigative journalism. Yet criticism followed her everywhere she went. Some accused her of ruining careers, while others dismissed her work as sensationalism. Comment sections lit up with heated debates whenever her name appeared online. She tried not to let the negativity consume her, focusing instead on the messages of gratitude from those who said her story gave them courage to speak out against injustices they'd faced in their own lives. Those notes reminded her why she did what she did, not for applause or validation, but because someone needed to say the words others couldn't. Her newfound fame opened doors she hadn't expected. Producers approached her with offers to host her own show, write books, or even star in documentaries about her journey. While tempting, these opportunities came with risks. Would taking on such projects dilute her message? Could she maintain the integrity that defined her work if she stepped into the spotlight full-time? After much deliberation, she decided to stay grounded in her roots as a journalist. Instead of chasing glamour, she chose to continue telling stories, stories that mattered, stories that challenged systems, and stories that reminded people of their shared humanity. One project in particular captured her attention. It involved traveling across the country to speak with workers from various industries, entertainment, tech, healthcare, education, all sharing experiences of workplace toxicity and resilience. She wanted to highlight how pervasive these issues were, showing that this wasn't just a problem within one network or one show. Each interview added depth to her understanding of systemic inequities, revealing patterns of behavior that transcended specific workplaces. People opened up to her in ways they hadn't before, trusting her to amplify their voices without judgment. By the time she wrapped filming, she knew she had uncovered something profound, a collective yearning for fairness and accountability. As the months passed, Karoline noticed subtle changes in herself. She carried the weight of everything she'd witnessed, the pain, the anger, the frustration, but she also carried a sense of purpose. Journalism had always been her passion, but now it felt like more than a career. It was a mission. Every story she told became a thread in a larger tapestry, weaving together narratives that demanded attention and action. She learned to balance her determination with compassion, recognizing that every person involved, whether victim or perpetrator, was human, flawed, and deserving of dignity. Still, the road ahead was uncertain. Critics continued to question her methods, accusing her of overstepping boundaries or playing judge and jury. Others argued that she hadn't gone far enough, urging her to dig deeper, expose more, and push harder. Balancing these opposing views tested her resolve, forcing her to constantly reassess her approach. Was she being too aggressive? Too lenient? Had she done enough? These questions haunted her late at night, but they also kept her sharp, reminding her that complacency was the enemy of progress. Despite the challenges, Karoline remained steadfast in her belief that transparency could drive meaningful change. She saw proof of this everywhere, in the policies companies implemented, in the conversations families had around dinner tables, and in the growing number of people willing to challenge authority when something felt wrong. Even small acts of courage, she realized, contributed to a larger movement. A single voice might seem insignificant, but when joined by others, it created a chorus impossible to ignore. By the end of the year, Karoline stood on stage at a prestigious awards ceremony, accepting recognition for her work. The room buzzed with energy as cameras flashed and applause filled the air. When it was her turn to speak, she paused, letting the noise subside before addressing the audience. "This award isn't mine alone," she began, her voice steady yet warm. "It belongs to everyone who trusted me with their stories. Everyone who dared to speak up despite fear, and everyone who believes we can build a better future." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that rippled through the crowd. But as she walked off stage, she reminded herself that awards weren't the goal. They were simply milestones along a much longer journey, a journey toward justice, equity, and understanding. She returned home that night, exhausted but fulfilled, knowing she had made a difference. Not everything was perfect, and not every battle had been won, but the world was moving forward. And that, she thought, was worth fighting for. In the quiet moments that followed, Karoline reflected on where she had started and how far she had come. She didn't consider herself extraordinary, just someone who cared deeply about doing the right thing. Journalism, she believed, wasn't about seeking glory. It was about holding a mirror to society and asking tough questions. Sometimes the answers hurt. Sometimes they inspired hope. Either way, they mattered. And as long as there were truths to uncover and voices to uplift, Karoline knew she would keep going, one story at a time. As the months stretched into a new year, Karoline found herself reflecting not just on what she had accomplished, but also on the lessons she had learned along the way. Life after the exposé wasn't what she had imagined it would be. It wasn't all triumphant headlines or standing ovations. It was messy, complicated, and deeply personal. For every person who thanked her for shining a light on injustice, there was another who accused her of tearing lives apart. For every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. But through it all, one thing became clear. Change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't come without resistance. The talk show at the heart of the scandal continued to struggle. Ratings remained low and attempts to rebrand fell flat. Viewers who had once tuned in daily now hesitated, unsure if the changes were genuine or merely cosmetic. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered as old wounds refused to heal. Some former employees filed lawsuits seeking compensation for years of mistreatment, while others quietly moved on with their lives, choosing to leave the past behind. The network itself underwent a complete overhaul, replacing key executives and restructuring departments to prevent history from repeating itself. Yet despite these efforts, trust, once broken, wasn't easily rebuilt. For Karoline, watching the fallout unfold was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt a sense of vindication knowing that her work had forced accountability where none existed before. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the weight of responsibility that came with exposing so many truths. She often thought about the people whose lives had been upended by her investigation. The hosts stripped of their platforms, the producers fired without warning, the staff members left scrambling to find new jobs. While some deserved consequences for their actions, others were collateral damage in a much larger fight. This realization gnawed at her, reminding her that even noble intentions could have unintended consequences. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were moments of hope. Former employees reached out to share how the scandal had inspired them to pursue better opportunities elsewhere. One woman described landing a leadership role at a competing network, vowing to create a workplace culture rooted in fairness and respect. Another man recounted starting his own production company, determined to give underrepresented voices a platform they'd long been denied. These stories reminded Karoline that while destruction often accompanied revelation, so too did renewal. Out of the ashes of the old system, something stronger, and hopefully kinder, could emerge. Her own career took unexpected turns as well. Offers poured in from networks eager to capitalize on her newfound fame, but Karoline remained cautious. She turned down lucrative deals that felt exploitative or misaligned with her values, opting instead to focus on projects that gave voice to the voiceless. One such project involved partnering with advocacy groups to produce a documentary series highlighting systemic issues in various industries. From factory floors to corporate boardrooms, she traveled across the country, listening to workers describe the challenges they faced daily. Each story added depth to her understanding of inequality, showing her how interconnected these struggles truly were. But telling these stories came with its own set of challenges. Critics accused her of cherry-picking examples to fit a narrative, while supporters urged her to dig even deeper. Some questioned whether she was becoming too comfortable in her role as a crusader, warning her against losing sight of objectivity. Others praised her for using her platform to amplify marginalized voices, calling her a beacon of integrity in an era plagued by misinformation. Navigating these conflicting perspectives tested her patience, forcing her to constantly reassess her approach. Was she being fair, balanced, honest? These questions followed her like shadows, shaping her decisions and guiding her path. Despite the scrutiny, Karoline refused to let fear dictate her choices. She knew that staying silent was far more dangerous than speaking out, even if it meant weathering criticism or facing backlash. Every email from someone thanking her for inspiring them to stand up against injustice reinforced her belief that this work mattered. Every message from a stranger saying, "You made me realize I'm not alone," reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Journalism, she realized, wasn't just about reporting facts. It was about fostering connection, empathy, and understanding. One day, while working on the final episode of her documentary series, Karoline received a letter from a young journalist just starting out in the field. The writer expressed admiration for her courage and asked for advice on navigating the complexities of investigative reporting. Karoline smiled as she read the note, remembering her own early days filled with uncertainty and self-doubt. She wrote back, sharing 3 pieces of wisdom she had gathered over the years. First, always prioritize truth over popularity. It's easy to chase applause, but harder, and more important, to stay true to your principles. Second, listen more than you speak. The best stories are often hidden in the quietest voices. And third, never forget that journalism is a service to your audience, to your sources, and to the world. By the time the documentary aired, it sparked conversations far beyond what Karoline had anticipated. Viewers flooded social media with comments, sharing their own experiences of workplace inequity and calling for reform. Lawmakers cited excerpts from the series during debates, using them as evidence to push for policy changes. Advocacy groups organized rallies demanding action from companies and governments alike. What began as a single exposé had blossomed into a movement, a testament to the power of storytelling to ignite change. Looking back, Karoline marveled at how much had changed, not just in the industry but within herself. She was no longer the wide-eyed rookie chasing leads in a tiny newsroom, nor was she the cautious investigator tiptoeing around powerful figures. She had grown into someone unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths, someone willing to bear the weight of responsibility that came with holding others accountable. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As she sat in her office late one evening, surrounded by notes and recordings from her latest project, Karoline allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with obstacles and unknowns. But she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stop fighting. Not for justice, not for fairness, and certainly not for the countless individuals counting on her to keep telling their stories. Because in the end, that's what journalism was all about. Giving a voice to those who needed it most and reminding the world that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. And so, with a deep breath and a renewed sense of purpose, Karoline picked up her pen and began writing the next chapter, not just of her life, but of the ongoing fight for truth, transparency, and humanity. As the years rolled on, Karoline's legacy continued to grow, not just as a journalist, but as a symbol of resilience and courage. The ripple effects of her exposé were felt far beyond the entertainment industry, sparking conversations about accountability and fairness in workplaces across the globe. What had started as a single story had evolved into a cultural reckoning, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about power dynamics and systemic inequities. For Karoline, it was both humbling and daunting to realize that her work had become part of something much larger than herself. The talk show at the center of the scandal eventually faded from public memory, replaced by newer shows promising transparency and inclusivity. But its downfall served as a cautionary tale for other networks and industries. Executives who once dismissed workplace complaints as minor grievances now scrambled to implement reforms, knowing full well that ignoring such issues could lead to catastrophic consequences. Anonymous hotlines were set up, diversity training programs became mandatory, and employees were encouraged, sometimes even incentivized, to speak up if they witnessed misconduct. While these changes weren't perfect, they marked a shift toward greater awareness and accountability. For Karoline, though, the journey wasn't without personal cost. The constant spotlight took its toll, leaving her drained and wary. She found herself second-guessing every decision, every word she spoke, knowing that critics were always ready to pounce. Some accused her of grandstanding, while others claimed she had gone too far in her pursuit of justice. There were days when the weight of expectation felt crushing, making her question whether she'd made the right choices. Yet, through it all, she clung to one simple truth: silence was never an option. If speaking out meant enduring criticism or facing backlash, so be it. The alternative, allowing wrongdoing to go unchecked, was unthinkable. Her resolve was tested repeatedly, especially when new controversies emerged. Other journalists began following in her footsteps, uncovering scandals in industries ranging from tech to healthcare. Some credited Karoline with inspiring their work, citing her fearless approach as a model for holding powerful figures accountable. Others, however, viewed her as competition, accusing her of hogging the limelight or overshadowing their efforts. The media landscape grew increasingly crowded, with everyone vying for attention in an age of information overload. Amidst the noise, Karoline reminded herself why she had chosen this path, not for fame or recognition, but to give voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. One of the most unexpected outcomes of her work was the relationships she built along the way. Former colleagues reached out to reconnect, expressing admiration for her tenacity and offering support during tough times. Strangers sent heartfelt letters thanking her for validating their experiences and encouraging them to stand up against injustice. Even some of the individuals implicated in her investigations eventually contacted her, not to apologize necessarily, but to acknowledge the impact of her reporting. These interactions reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling to bridge divides and foster understanding. Despite the challenges, Karoline refused to let cynicism creep in. She knew that progress was rarely linear. Setbacks were inevitable, and victories often came at great cost. Still, she chose to focus on the positives, the small wins that added up over time. A company implementing fair hiring practices. A manager stepping down after being accused of discrimination. A young employee finding the courage to report harassment. Each of these moments, no matter how minor they seemed, represented a step forward. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, Karoline believed that collective effort could create lasting change. Her own career continued to evolve in unexpected ways. After completing her documentary series, she decided to take a break from high-profile projects and return to grassroots journalism. She missed the simplicity of sitting across from someone in their living room, listening to their story without judgment or interruption. So, she packed her bags and traveled to small towns across the country, seeking out voices often overlooked by mainstream media. Farmers struggling with climate change, teachers fighting for better resources, families navigating the complexities of immigration policies. Their stories reminded her of why she fell in love with journalism in the first place: the opportunity to connect with real people and share their truths with the world. During one of her trips, she met a group of factory workers advocating for safer working conditions. They invited her to attend a town hall meeting where they planned to present their case to local officials. As she sat in the back of the crowded room, watching them articulate their concerns with passion and precision, Karoline felt a surge of pride. These were ordinary people standing up to extraordinary challenges, refusing to back down despite overwhelming odds. In that moment, she realized that her role wasn't just to report their stories, it was to amplify their voices, ensuring that they reached audiences capable of affecting change. When she returned home, Karoline began writing a book chronicling her experiences and the lessons she had learned along the way. It wasn't intended to be a memoir or a self-help guide, but rather a reflection on the importance of truth-telling in an era defined by misinformation. She wanted readers to understand that journalism wasn't just about breaking news or chasing headlines. It was about fostering empathy, challenging assumptions, and reminding people of their shared humanity. By the time the manuscript was complete, she felt a sense of closure, not because her work was finished, but because she had finally put her thoughts into words. The book became a bestseller, sparking debates in living rooms and classrooms alike. Readers praised her honesty and vulnerability, calling her a beacon of integrity in a fractured world. Critics, predictably, accused her of oversimplifying complex issues or failing to offer concrete solutions. But Karoline didn't mind. She knew that no single book or person could solve the problems plaguing society. Her goal was simply to start a conversation, planting seeds of thought that might inspire others to take action. Looking back on everything she had achieved, Karoline felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunities she'd been given, the people she'd met, and the lessons she'd learned. She knew she wasn't perfect, nor did she have all the answers, but she also knew that perfection wasn't the point. What mattered was showing up, doing the work, and staying true to her values even when it was hard. In the end, Karoline understood that her journey would never truly be over. There would always be more stories to tell, more injustices to expose, and more battles to fight. But she welcomed the challenge, knowing that each step brought her closer to a world where fairness and compassion prevailed. And so, with pen in hand and fire in her heart, she prepared to tackle whatever came next, not for glory or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do.